All right, we got 10 o'clock on the dot. All right, so let's get started, and people start to filter in here as well as we go along. So welcome everyone to our first webinar of the year, building an all-star CI function, the skill sets your team needs to have, even if you're an army of one. We're super excited to be running another webinar with everyone, and we'll just get into some housekeeping stuff before we get to what everyone came for and introducing our presenter as well. So this webinar is going to be recorded, and the recording will be sent to you after everything is done. We'll also have the slide deck made available to you. In the meantime as well, engage in the chat, and if you have any questions, just submit them at any time. We're going to be doing a Q&A session at the end, but if there is something relevant to Scott's presentation and it doesn't derail the conversation at all, we can also sprinkle some in during his presentation. And we'll also be having a few polls as well, so make sure to engage with them. And yeah, they'll be coming out. I think we have 2 or 3 for this one. Yeah, so let's introduce our presenter. So today we have Scot Kim with us, back at Intellicon. Now Scott and I were just talking, it feels like forever ago, but it was mid-November. We partnered with Scott to do a presentation then. Our VP of Product Marketing, Vincent, and Scott had a presentation together, and it was really well received. So we were like hell-bent on getting Scott back, and thankfully he obliged to kick this off in January. And a quick rundown of Scott. He's 20 years now in the tech industry, and 10 years specifically in competitive intelligence. Currently, the global competitive intelligence leader at Conga. I believe you're an army of one over there right now, Scott, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
Right. But a ton of experience at Gartner, Hitachi, Cisco, you name it. Also, I learned yesterday that Scott is a renowned traveler. We were going over our favorite cities we've been to, and he managed to rattle off a city in every single continent pretty much across the globe. Unfortunately, Vancouver was not in his top 5 list. He said it was an honorable mention. It just missed out, but we won't hold that against him. Anyways, Scott, we're super excited to have you here, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Adam. And by the way, I have to remiss to say that the 2 cities are Canadian based, which were Toronto and Montreal. So at least it covered those different aspects of Canada. So
that's just salt in the wounds.
So today's agenda is one, I want to talk about what does an all-star CI team look like? Whether you're an army of one, which I am today at Conga, or if you're managing a bunch of CI analysts, which I've done in my past life at different companies. And throughout my experience, I want to share with you what I think are the key characteristics that you want to see in a CI team, and how can you proliferate the skill sets of your CI team to be relevant to all the cross-functional organizations within your company. And then the second is I'm going to provide you some competitive insights that's going to help you be creative, because part of CI is all about the storytelling. It's about telling the story and being able to craft all the data that you've gained on a specific competitor and put together a certain narrative to understand, what are you trying to articulate when you talk to your sales organization, or when you talk to your executive staff or other folks like the partner community, for instance, if your company is partner centric, because there's need to be some sort of narrative that's going to be the top care abouts of what your audience is going to want. Then third is, the best practices of building a CI function and also measuring. This is the scary word. What KPIs do you want to measure by? It induces accountability and also induces your ability to kind of, in some ways, how can I add more resources? Because if you're seeing KPIs being this low, but your output is, not equaling to the output that you're coming, perhaps you can use the KPIs as leverage to say, hey, maybe we need more budget in the CI function, whether it be adopting a new tool, a repository, or even hiring new CI analysts. That's, from a perspective of the army of one to kind of grow your team. And finally, wrapping up with questions and hopefully having this a very collaborative session as well. So the first thing is, and we've all seen this, competitive intelligence is really important in all different aspects of the company, whether it be product, sales, marketing, customer success, but they have a different perspective or different care about of how they consume competitive intelligence. And so the one key factor that I want to drive to everyone is a great competitive intelligence analyst should know how the company operates. So case in point, as an example, if you're at a company and perhaps the win rate are low, you need to investigate, why is our win rates low? Is it indeed, are we losing to the competitor? Or it could be something internal, because the first thing I've learned, and those of you who are experienced on the call, is sometimes the biggest competitor is not the competition itself, it's the company internally. So maybe it could be poor execution. It could be the sales cycle is too long and we're losing to the competitor. So these are areas that, as a competitive intelligence, a smart and great competitive intelligence analyst need to figure out is, what are the key areas of product are they looking for, like gaps in our product? Maybe there's a feature or functionality that we're losing on a customer success. Perhaps it could be, my favorite is pricing. I'm always losing because of pricing. Well, pricing is not the only reason why we lose. Another is from the sales side. I need to know, what FUD, what fear, uncertainty, and doubt can I cast on my competition? What are those quote unquote silver bullets, so to speak? And finally, from marketing, are we positioning ourselves properly? So I know a lot of you probably already know this, but competitive intelligence, in my opinion, is the linchpin among all these core areas. And we're going to talk about collaboration being a top key characteristic of a competitive intelligence analyst. So I've worked with Clue, I've worked with Vincent, I've worked with others, and this is what we came up with. And what's the AllStar team? Like, if you can put together the dream team of competitive intelligence, we believe that these are the key personas or key attributes that a CI team, a really robust one, should have. You've got to have a researcher's mentality. If your CI analysts do not have a researcher's mentality, then this is going to be a house of cards. You need to be able to have the ability to flip every rock and look at every single piece of data to understand where does it lead to. And remember, in today's days, CI is a lot easier than what it was 15 years ago. I remember 15 years ago, finding salient CI or competitors' data, I should say, was very difficult. But now, with the advent of the internet and all the CI tools out there, it's gotten a lot easier. The MBA, the MBA, I mean, I'm not saying that everybody should go get an MBA or whatnot, but the biggest thing about the MBA is to be able to, like I mentioned, is to understand the full 360-degree view of the company and how it operates. Because sometimes the biggest competitor is yourself in poor execution. So someone who is a problem solver is what we kind of deem as the MBA. Can you solve problems? Are you a critical thinker? The storyteller, like I mentioned, you have to be able to craft a narrative and to be able to have your slides. I'll be frank with you. You need to make sure that your slides are easy on the eyes and it tells a story. The worst thing you want competitive to have is a bunch of textual information, just a data blah on a slide, because that's not going to be easy on the eyes, and it needs to have some sort of narrative around that. The exceller. So obviously, depending on how your competitive team is operated, you need to be able to sell yourself, to be able to brand the competitive team. This is so important, because to get a seat at the table, competitive, has to be well branded and well sold. And usually that's the responsibility of the conductor, which I'll get to soon. But the collaborator, a big thing about competitive is you cannot do competitive in a vacuum. You need to be able to work with others because someone out there knows something. And when you do the research and collaborate kind of go hand in hand. You need to go out there and have that journalistic ability to collaborate and interview people to understand what that competitive landscape looks like. And finally, the conductor. This is someone who can orchestrate all these moving parts within your organization and within your team to make sure that the team is being successful. So this is what we deem as the all-star team. This is the dream team, so to speak. Now, I know this is not reality. A lot of you probably are the Army in one, like I am today. So what key personas or skills do we want out of this? Well, we believe that it's these three, bar none, you need the researcher, the storyteller, and the collaborator. Obviously, MBA, Exceller, and conductor is important, but right now, to get the current money team going, these are the core attributes that you need to get yourself started out. Now, what I'm going to do is share with you some skills or some ideas of how can we accentuate each of the different roles here. So from a researcher perspective, it's the ability to triangulate CI data for credibility. Remember, CI data, in order to be successful, you need to be credible and you need to make the data, the CI data as actionable as you can. And to do that, this is where it comes in a little bit of the collaboration, but we'll speak with that a little bit later, is the ability to triangulate the data to make sure that it is credible and it's true. Because if you're gonna base it off of one source, you may be in trouble. So it's really important to have a process in place to triangulate the data. Now, this is for exemplary purposes. Triangulate with sales, triangulate with the customer, triangulate with the partners. Again, with partner summits, executive briefings, quarterly QBRs, it's important to triangulate the data to make sure that the data is sound and credible, and then figure out ways to make it actionable, essentially.
Scott, we had a good question on this, and it might be more relevant to the collaborator role when you get to that portion, but we've received a question that's talking sort of about in your experience, where do you sometimes see this communication within this triangle break down?
I think it breaks down in two scenarios. One, especially in today's COVID era, it's really hard to go into the office and have that water cooler type of discussion. So you have to be uberly, like over communicate, be proactive and set up meetings on Zoom, especially if it's someone that you don't know, you've never met before. So there's a little bit of virtual crashing of being uberly strong, of setting up time with people that you don't know. And so when you talk, it's like the 3 degrees of separation. It's like you don't know that you don't know. So when you're talking to someone from sales, as an example, ask that person, do you know who else I should speak to with this concept that I'm trying to bring in? And have that person refer you to that person, and you build your network out, particularly in this COVID era, because everything's over Zoom. We can't see people face to face, and we can't walk down the office. So that's one thing, is you got to be uberly, I would say, you have to be myopically strong of just reaching out to as many people as you can. The second thing where this breaks down is, and I'm going to tell you something that's very tactical, is the ability to take copious notes. Because there's times where, 1 week, if you meet, I'm making up numbers, 50 people in 1 week, you may confuse of some of the conversations you've had. So it's very important I use OneNote. And so everybody I speak to, I put all my notes in OneNote, and I make sure I know who that person is, so then you can always refer to that. So it's the ability to be organized of the data that you're collecting from which source that you're getting to. Because if you're not an organized person, this triangulation model will break down. Those are probably the two biggest areas from my experience of how this would break down. Good, great question. Any other questions before I continue on?
No, you can.
Okay. Here is another vehicle that I use. I actually use this very often. It's probably a little bit of my Gartner days, you know, with the magic quadrant in some ways. But another way to articulate the data, and this is where it gets pleasing to the eyes, is create a 2x2 4-quadrant matrix. So I like to use logos of the competitor. So I use a tool like Snagit or something. And I also use a tool like when you start putting the different types of logos on here, I also like to use a tool called Zoomit, where you could actually, point arrows here and make the discussion interactive like this. And that makes the conversation extremely interactive and collaborative and well. So like when you show in a pleasing way of what the competitive landscape looks like. So again, exemplary purposes. On the upper left-hand corner, these are the incumbents. Upper right-hand corner, partner threats, because partners could be co-opetitious. Co-opetition is a whole nother topic, but that's an area that you got to look at. Can these partners compete with us? Digital disruption threat. These are players out there that you never thought that they would encroach in your space, and now they have. Example of this is Amazon probably acquiring Whole Foods. I'm sure the grocery retail market never thought that Amazon would become a direct threat to them until that acquisition happened. So in this area, in the bottom left-hand corner of this quadrant, this could be a very strategic conversation that you can have with your executive team on. We believe from a competitive perspective that these are the players that could encroach into our space. And then the bottom left is obviously startups. What startups are out there that could disrupt our market, essentially? Again, a vehicle or tool, but this is a way to articulate what's the best way to show your competitive insights from all the competitive data that you've triangulated into a slide like this. Finally, this is my final researcher slide, is I love scorecards, I love heat maps. So here's a heat map that shows, for instance, here are the core competencies that you may want to measure against. And then over here are the different color variations that you want to show. I'm actually using this for our sales kickoff for the company I'm working for right now, that shows where we're strong, where we're weak, and where we're neutral, and show in a very high level view of how we fare against the competition. Now, this scorecard or this heat map can be controversial, so be aware that whatever the controversy is, let's say this part of it is, excuse me, not that part, but let's say this part of it were yellow, but the competitor is green here. This could be a controversial discussion that we could have. And so it's very important to make sure that you are well prepared in explaining this to whomever you're sharing this scorecard to. Now I want to switch gears and talk about the Collaborator. This is all about building what I call the competitive intelligence community. And like I mentioned in the previous earlier slide, it's about being that advocate, having the ability to share with all the different cross-functional teams, because competitive intelligence is a two-way street, in my opinion. Not only are you providing competitive insights to them, what you want in return from them is competitive data or competitive competitive data points from them because the sales may hear it from the field. They may hear it from customers or partners. Like I occasionally gets price list through a partner that a salesperson would give me. Now there are some ethics around that, and I won't get into it. But the way I look at it is, if the documentation does not have anything that is crossing the ethics line, like roadmaps or trade secrets or whatever, that's something that you're going to have a conversation and set rules among your community. But it's really important to have a two-way relationship with each of your organizations within your community. And all that is done by, be frank with you, just relationship building with each one of them. At various companies, if you had a budget, what we do is we'd reward them with like little tiny gifts. That could be a t-shirt. It could be one company, we had budget where we gave them Apple TVs, say, thank you for the competitive information. It was great. Here's an Apple TV as an example. That also helps people get excited of sharing competitive information back to you as well.
We had a question on this one as well, Scott. You might have answered it near the end there, but it was asking, how do you go about being visible and building this relationship with departments when you're at a larger company? I'm not sure if there's a difference between your time with maybe a smaller team or a larger team.
Yeah, so branding the CI team is the same between larger and smaller companies. In some ways, I think it's easier to brand yourself at a smaller company because because there's not a lot of politics and not a lot of you're not dealing with 30,000 people, right? So you have to look at what sliver of this community can I tailor to. Like, take for instance my experience with Cisco. Cisco had their service provider group, they had their enterprise group, they had their commercial group, they had, I mean, it splintered out. So competitive had to be segmented, so to speak, into service provider, enterprise, commercial, home, as an example. So that's a lot of work, right? You, as a team, you have to segment it to what each of these different community members care about. Whereas a smaller company, it's sometimes you may work for a company that's a one-trick pony. And when I say that, meaning that you have one or two products that you are trying to proliferate and sell to the community. So obviously CI is really, mirrored to those one or two products. Where a larger company, you have a whole horizontal product set on that. But to answer the question directly, it's all about branding and getting well known. So SKO, great place. SKO to the sales, getting time at SKO to the sales team is gold. If you can get 30 minutes to an hour, that's going to build your brand immediately. So it's really getting your seat at the table with that. Second thing is doing monthly webinars to be able to get your face out there, especially in today's COVID era. It's really easy to put together a webinar nowadays. Third, newsletters, having emails get sent out after you do a webinar and sending the presentations out. And the other part is creating the collateral that you need, whether it be battle cards, whether it be competitive dossiers or briefings is what we call them, or quick tick analysis of what's going on in the marketplace right now. If you can get as much output as you can, that is a way to brand yourself and get your seat at the table, essentially.
We've had someone piggyback on your comments right before you mentioned that daily or weekly newsletters being very helpful for them in these quarterly briefs. And also there was another question, I think you may have touched on it there as well, as what if CI becomes permanently remote beyond just the multiple Zoom calls? What are sort of the tips to keep that kind of visibility and communication?
So sometimes the CI team could be distributed among different geos. Like, you may have an analyst in India, you may have an analyst in Europe, you may have an analyst in the United States, Canada, various parts of the world. I think it's very important to always, and again, this is I'm not saying anything that everyone doesn't know. It's about making sure that your brand and your face is shown. So when you have a Zoom meeting, have the camera on so they know what you look like. When you have a webinar, make sure that you're well branded into the presentation slides. Like I said, if you do great work, and I'm the proponent of let your work do your talking. Don't talk the talk. Let your work show your talking. People are going to gravitate towards CI. And this is actually a very important point. Competitive intelligence analysts are truth seekers. I want to repeat, truth seekers. We're not marketing. We don't spin. We don't tell a story. We tell it like it is. And so sometimes it may involve perhaps calling your baby ugly or whatever that looks like. You're not doing it to be detrimental. You're doing it because we as CI analysts have a code of integrity where we have to show, we're losing these deals because of X, Y, and Z, whatever that is. Maybe it's because of our product stinks, or maybe it's because we're not easy to do business with. It could be that. It could be a myriad reasons. I think we as CI analysts need to understand where to be controversial, where it makes sense. I mean, don't be totally negative, but we have to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. By having that type of mentality, I believe that it's going to accelerate your brand and providing the truth that people need to know to run the business more efficiently or better, if you will. All right, so the storyteller. So this is the art of telling the narrative. It's very simple. I mean, I know this is a very simple graphic here, but it's really identifying what's the situation, what's the impact. Like if we don't do anything, what's the impact? It could mean us going out of business. It could mean we're losing deals. So what's the resolution? What can we do to resolve this current situation that we're having? So to put a competitive veneer over this, what does this mean from a competitive situation? Well, the situation is, it could be we're losing a deal, we're losing deals, or it could be a new competitor popped up and they're getting a lot of energy, a lot of noise in the marketplace. What's the impact to us? If we don't do anything, what's going to happen to us? Is it, business as usual? Probably not. So what we're going to do with it? CI is what we're going to do is we're going to work with sales. We're going to have a spiff, and we're going to say we're going to go after this particular competitor, and we're going to identify their key weaknesses, because it's about leveraging your strengths and hitting your competitor's weakness with your strengths. That is the key to competitive. So if you're able to formulate a narrative of leveraging your strength, addressing the situation by hitting their weaknesses, then you're able to mitigate the competitive threat that's happening. I think the best example I could share is when I worked for a particular company, there was a competitor that created a brand new product, and they were able to do a certain function really well, almost better than what we can. However, that particular function was only geared to a very, very sliver of a customer base. Only a certain customer base would utilize that particular feature. But of course, like every competitor does, or every marketing does, they say, everybody could do this. Everybody should have that. Well, it's about displacing that FUD, saying, no, not everybody needs that feature. It's only good for these certain sets. Like it could be a telco feature, like for a vertical. This is only good for the telco. It's not really good for manufacturing. It's not good for healthcare. It's not good for general purpose. And so identifying that and saying our product does well horizontally across all the different verticals. So now you're mitigating the competitor's threat in from a horizontal perspective. That is the art of storytelling. And this is where it's important to work with your product marketing and your marketing team to kind of formulate that as well. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but any other questions on some of the examples that I shared, kind of the vehicles we shared to help you be a better researcher, storyteller, and collaborator? Okay, and I see you shaking your head, so I'll continue on. So now let's go back to you, those of you who have a competitive team. You're now the orchestrator. You're the manager or the director or the VP of your management team. How do you run, how do I hire new talent? How do I efficiently run this team to make sure that we're, rowing towards the same direction? Well, here are my best practice. So best practice number one is, this is from a hiring perspective. These are core competencies that I look for in a new hire. And I'll be frank with everyone, finding great competitive intelligence analysts is very hard to do. And one of the biggest pitfalls I see managers do is looking for technical skill sets. Do you know my space well? Do you know the technical, do you have the technical chops in this area? I think this is now my opinion. Some of you may have a different opinion, and I'm always open to have this conversation with any of you. I think finding someone who knows the space that you're in and being parochial to just the technical aspect is a detriment to getting a great competitive intelligence analyst. Sometimes what I look for is somebody that may not be in my space, but if they possess these 5 core competencies, there's someone I want to bring in. Because if they have these 5 core competencies, they will have the ability to learn about your space. And better yet, maybe they'll have the lens or the perspective to see something that you may not ever see because you've been eating, sleeping, and breathing that space for years. So just think about that. So one core competency I look for is digital dexterity. I know this is a buzzword, but really, this is someone who is resourceful, who's a self-starter, who's a problem solver. That's what I'm looking for, is somebody who is able to say, Scott, I'll take care of it. We'll figure it out. A problem solver. Someone that could overcome any obstacles and bust holes through walls. That's someone what I'm looking for. Competitive acumen. Can this person have the research chops to look into something, flip every rock in the industry, and to be able to comprehend, be able to digest, comprehend, consume mass amounts of data, and to be able to create the narrative that we need. How do you gather? Where do you start? Have you been frustrated not finding information? What do you do when that time comes? Somebody who is able to be very resourceful in finding competitive information. As an example, would this be is, sometimes some of the competitors we look for are privately owned companies, and there's no financial data about the company. So how do we figure that out? Well, this one person, ethically, they were able to look into patent submissions from this competitor. They were able to look at some of the different types of partner ecosystems that wasn't really highlighted, and to be able to look into different areas to kind of stitch together what that competitor is doing. That person had the acumen to know where to go. Another place is the GSA government website for the United States. Any company that works with the United States has to put their list price on the GSA site. That's another place where someone who has the competitive acumen are able to kind of dig the information from. The third is being a risk taker. I love risk takers. Somebody who's bold and say, you know what, we're going to make a gut decision here. And it's those type of competitive intelligence that are bold and provocative. And that's what I look for, is someone that is bold and provocative, who can always push the envelope. Because as you know, the market's changing. There's so many different emerging markets with cloud players out there. Maybe the healthcare, COVID has really disrupted the marketplace. It's somebody who can take that risk and say, hey, maybe we should look at a different direction. And then the other last two is pretty straightforward: an influencer, somebody who is able to collaborate well and to be able to brand themselves well and to be able to articulate in a way where we can be successful. And then obviously you got to deliver, you got to provide results and whatever you do when it comes to competitive. So those are the 5 key core competencies I look for.
We had some we had a few comments and actually another question that will segue well into your next portion here, Scott. First of all, someone mentioned that that's really refreshing to hear when you explain this, that sometimes they find it really frustrating to hear that constant question of have you sold? And also another note is that being able to see the big picture is really key when you're looking for this new hire.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, another question, which will segue nicely into your next portion here, is what are some examples of KPIs used to measure the success?
Perfect.
It's serendipitous here.
Absolutely. I'm glad someone asked that question. So here are some key measurements that I incorporate. Now, some of these are internal, meaning, so I'm going to show 2 different KPIs. One is internal, that measures the output or the results of your team itself. And then the other KPI I'm going to share are the measurement of how well the company is doing against the competition. So this slide here will show the measurement of how well your competitive team is operating. You know, it could be number of sales calls or visit. One thing I love is some companies allow the salespeople like to bring the competitive intelligence to the customer. I like that. That way you can have a very non-biased conversation with the customer about what the competitive landscape looks like. If you have a repository, which I'll get to in another slide here, look at the number of downloads your document is being downloaded. And that's a very important KPI. Maybe it's good to show. Dollar deals competitive was involved, number of deals involved. Another key point here that I'm not showing here is some companies incorporate what I call the war room. Here at Conga, we have the war room. And so a key KPI measure is how many deals go through the war room. And then I look at how many deals were won and how many deals were lost, or what's the percentage of win-loss of deals that went through the war room. So in other words, did the war room help the AE and the client in winning the deal, or has the win room been detrimental? Hopefully it's the former, right? We want the war room to be extremely productive. And usually the key participants we have at the war room are product marketing, product management, professional services, some SCs who are like, the champions or the ringers, and others in these war rooms that help the salespeople displace the competitors' fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but also strategize what are ways to get that deal into pole position and cross the finish line, essentially. So this is internal. Take a screenshot, or we're going to send you these slides. But here's another one that I want to share with everybody. These are some external ones of the company that I want to show here, which is, types of deals lost to competitors. Which deals are we losing on, like, if you're structured like commercial business, strategic business, or enterprise businesses? And then among the 3 segments, the average size deals we normally win and average size deals we lose. Or it could be something like, percentage of deals lost at which sales phase. So if you're using Salesforce, there's different phases in the chevron of Salesforce. So it could be, do we lose deals in the discovery phase, the justification, the negotiation? What phase of the sales cycle are we losing on? And, this is an interesting thing, is top tier salespeople winning against competitors versus mid-tier salespeople winning against competitors? That's an interesting slant of it. And then what percentage of the deals lost or win against certain competitors? You may have certain competitors that you're eyeing on. So these are just, again, suggestions that I have from an external. And I mentioned this one, percent of deals we win, lost that went through the win rooms or war rooms, and to which competitors. So these are interesting KPIs from an external perspective to look at. And this is something that I would recommend you working with your sales operations team or the sales finance team to kind of work with these KPIs as well. Whereas these other KPIs that I'm showing you here is all about measuring the output of your team. Any other questions, Adam, or is this?
No, not specific on that. We've got a couple that will be very good to touch on in the Q&A section after.
Okay, fantastic. This is the repository I'm going to talk about. You know, this could be, you know, it could be SharePoint, it could be Seismic, it could be, you know, Clues, it could be whomever, you know, technology is. But the point of this is you want a piece of technology that the CI analysts are the producers, you create your deliverables, and then it secures it in a single source of truth in the repository. And then you want permission-based access to the consumers, which could be sales, channel partners, or marketing people. And you want to make sure you control this, because as you know, if competitive materials get to the wrong hands, that could be extremely detrimental. So you want to make sure, and plus also, all different deliverables are not supposed to be delivered to the same people. So I always make sure, and it's a little bit of a administrative headache, but all competitive documentations needs to be channelized for channel partners. It needs to be different to a marketing person or a salesperson. You know, get away from the habit of sending emails out with your presentations, because the problem with that is that sometimes somebody would say, this competitive deliverable is rubbish because it has old data or it's data that's not relevant. And then you look at the version and it's like, wow, God, that's because you're looking at a 12-month document. How many of you have gone through that?
All right, so we are back here and we had plenty of questions to get to. So I'm just going to fire them your way, Scott, here. First of all, when you talked about the acumen you want when you're looking for a competitive intelligence professional, is business acumen and technical acumen as necessary as this competitive acumen you spoke of?
Yes, so I believe that business acumen is more important than technical acumen. However, I want to be very clear. It's important to have some level of technical experience to be able to understand the language and the market that you're working in. I'm not asking for people to be engineers or to have the ability to code, for instance. Like, I don't need someone who could do Python or random forest analysis, those type of statistical analysis, but somebody like a data scientist is what I'm saying, but somebody who understands the data and the market that you're in, so then you could be a more comprehensive competitive intelligence analyst. So I look for someone who has the business acumen a little bit more so than the technical, but that person still needs to have some level of technical experience, I should say, to be able to understand the market and the data points that you're trying to triangulate and also to provide insights on.
In terms of the KPIs and metrics you were speaking of, are these, you shared a lot of examples. Are these KPI and metrics you use to measure, are they different when you're part of a larger team compared to when you're in this smaller CI team that you're in right now?
Yes, they're very different. Obviously, when you're a larger team, your output increases. And so it's important to have key KPIs that measures not only the team's output, but also have KPIs that measures the overall company's output. Like I showed those two different KPIs. When it's the army of one, I think I think accountability and measurement of one person is pretty easy, right? Are you able to deliver the results that are asked of you? And are you, like I mentioned during the webinar, do you have a seat to the table when it comes to strategies and you know, the execution plans that your company are having? Those are probably the big. So I guess what I'm saying is the KPIs when you're Army of One is very soft, but it's really, do you provide value of every meeting that you come into, whether it be with your executive team, with the key business unit leaders? Do you provide value? And that's how you're measured when you're Army of One.
We've got two questions here that they're fairly similar, and it's sort of like when you mentioned that seat to the table and how much influence you have as a CI person. One of the questions we had here was, what if you're a newer researcher, as you mentioned, and you see necessary changes that should be made in your process or in the group? How do you go about trying to change them, especially as a newer researcher?
I think the very first thing is, like I mentioned, is reach out to people. Let them know what your experience, your background, what your charter is, and to be able to deliver the value. If you're able, there's two things that a CI analyst could do for people. One, take their pain away, because the reason why they're hiring a CI person is because CI is being done at someone else's, how do I say, somebody is doing CI when it's not part of their job function. so it's a pain point that you're taking away from that person, saying, hey, I'm now going to do CI. I'm now focused on this, so you can actually do your other work, and I'm here to be a partner to you and feed you CI information to get your work better. That's one. The second is the ability to just, like I said, just the ability to provide the value and the results that people look for in a CI analyst. So it's one's taking the pain away from someone, because it's probably become someone else's task that's not their core competency or their core work, and also two, to provide the value that they can and see you as a trusted advisor, essentially.
And going back in one of your slides, you mentioned you showed that sort of where CI fits amongst various departments. The question was, who does CI, or where does the CI function typically report to?
You know what? I've seen it report to different organizations: sales, product management, corporate marketing. In some ways, I've seen it in products, like reporting to the chief products officer. To be frank with you, I don't think it matters where it sits. You know, it just becomes to the point where if an organization or if a company sees value in competitive intelligence, whether it's in marketing, engineering, product marketing, product, you know, chief product officer you're reporting to, I don't think it matters. I think that's the whole thing about building that CI community that I was talking about, and building, establishing those relationships, because it is truly a cross-functional position that you need to be in.
We also had a couple explainers. So earlier in the webinar, you mentioned some different templates you could use to share your insights. And one of them was the scorecard, where you have them color-coded by competitor. And one of the questions we had was, are you able to expand or add more context to each of the colors? If you've given competitor B a green for branding and competitor C a yellow, is there more that you can kind of add that provides a little bit more context?
You can. Like I said, these templates are meant to be guidelines, but I want to be clear on this. So when you create presentations, there's two types of presentations. It's either a presentation like in a structural manual, so there is no vocal narrative around it. It's someone who just looks at the slides and say, okay, this is what I need to know about the competition. And then there's other slides you build where you need a presenter to present it. The template that I shared was in the constructs of you being the presenter and the slide that you're presenting on. So as a presenter, the onus is on you to articulate that narrative of the reason why something's yellow and then something's why is green. Now, in the notes section of the presentation, I highly suggest putting in your sources and your references and the reasons why a particular competitor is scoring a green, yellow, or red, just to make sure that when you present this to people, you have that. Now, if you're creating a presentation that you're not planning on presenting it on yourself, then I think it's adequate to have certain reasons why it is next to underneath the dots maybe, but make sure if you do that, it's going to make the slide very busy. And I just want to make sure, because you want to make sure that the slide is aesthetic to the presenter's eyes.
Definitely. That like easy to digest, it can get a bit of an information overload.
Yes.
Similar to this, do you have any examples or experiences in your career where you've had good or bad in terms of articulating CI to enable sales teams specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think the worst thing that I've ever experienced is when people disagree with your assessment. And that's where it becomes controversial. And I think this is where my slide, looking for someone who's risk taker, to be able to debate and articulate reasons why you rated the competitor this versus us in this specific color. Now, at the end of the day, it's about being the truth seeker, but the other side of it is if your boss says you need to change the color, then you probably have to change the color because you don't want to lose your job or something. But the biggest thing is never lose the integrity of being an analyst and a researcher. That's probably the biggest thing. You may not agree to other people's suggestions of changing the color, but at the end of the day, as an analyst that you looked at that clearly from a 360 degree view of it. So that's probably the biggest challenge as an analyst, is to be able to have a voice and to defend your findings. And the other side of the success is, because you defend your findings, you may be able to influence and change people's opinions about it.
Definitely. Actually, in the comment section as you were talking, someone mentioned like the truth is so important, especially in the long run, rather than telling teams what they want to hear or sugarcoating something.
Exactly.
Like, it's not being blunt, but being honest.
Exactly.
I've got two more questions for you here. First one, when you're talking about building your team, what are some of your favorite interview questions that you would like when you're looking for this risk taker or someone with this competitive acumen? Do you have some like go-to questions that you like to ask?
It's funny. I don't really. I kind of go through how I feel with the person I'm talking to, because every interview is a little different. I mean, I'm asking similar questions, but I'm really looking at the person's how do I say, not only their skills but their personality. And a lot of that is just asking, I mean, though I'm not a big fan of this, sometimes I give situational type questions like, hey, if you were put in this situation, what will you do to fix it or to get out of it or whatever that is? And I'm kind of curious what that person would say, as an example. I like to make the interview process as easy as possible. I'm not there to grill them. I think interviewers who do that, I think is a travesty to interviewing. I think it's all about, can this person do it, and can you work with this person? And I think those are the two. I mean, everyone should know that, right? But it's really understanding the way how they think and the way how they critical think is what I'm looking for. So if you can ask questions like, if you were put in this situation, what would you do? Or give me an experience of what's it like to do a project or something like that. Try to ascertain what are the things that are going through their minds.
And then last question here, this one, which I really like about when we get these webinars, we have people from such varying degrees of experience in the CI world. Yeah, very tactical questions. And then some like this one is, they just want to know, what is the best path to becoming a CI professional? And maybe maybe it's you could share a little bit of your own experience, but also like what you've seen amongst people in the industry over your time here.
You know, it's interesting. What I look for is somebody who's kind of like a Renaissance man or a Renaissance lady, you know, somebody who thinks out of the box. And there is no clear path. I mean, it's not like you go to school and all of a sudden, boom, I'm a competitive intelligence analyst. No, that doesn't happen. I think what I look for is somebody who has a thirst for knowledge, you know, who is always inquisitive, somebody who has the ability to look at the different data and create their own narrative, kind of like the storytelling I was talking about. Somebody who has a journalistic approach, like I said, being able to ask the right questions. Those are core skill sets I look for in a CI person. Now, the person could come from myriad background. I've seen CI people come from engineering backgrounds. I've seen them come from sales backgrounds. I've seen them come from the MBA background. Someone who went to MBA school, was a really good strategist. There is no path to being a competitive intelligence analyst, in my opinion. I think it's just somebody who has a thirst for knowledge, who's inquisitive, and is able to comprehend data and be a critical thinker is what I look for.
That's a great answer. That's a very great insight, especially from someone that's got the experience that you do and the background that you do. I think that's all of the questions we've got here on file, and I really appreciate you taking the time. This was super popular amongst our registrants, and I'm sure we will do another one in the future. Fingers crossed.
Thank you very much, Adam and Mackenzie. I appreciate it. It's a delight to be with Clue. So.